Did you take the
Ask some
extra?
question.
I know. Oh,
I did not take that.
okay.
But that's hard.
Yeah.
That's harder to see for me.
Yeah. I like some answers. Okay, enough. Depends on the rules. If it's Tammy's rules.
My rules, she's turned all the way, so. You want to-
Tammy, you ready?
Thank you so much. Yes.
All right, I will call to a close the recess that we have been in since 6:45, following the joint meeting with the towns of Ulysses, Covert, and Hector. Thank you to the town board members that were present. I thought that was a good discussion and coverage of some of the information there. I do have a change to the remaining agenda, at least I did. I take that back. I don't have a change to the remaining agenda. I would simply note that Trustee Watkins is excused as she is on vacation. Trustee Hannan is hopefully going to be joining us remotely at some point, as unfortunately the plague has entered his dwelling. So hopefully he'll sign on here shortly. Any other changes from Ben or Ben? Item number 5 on the agenda is approval of board minutes from the January 14th meeting, which are in the Dropbox. And it's trying to load.
I had a couple comments that I gave Tammy.
And I made the changes.
Okay. Then if there are no other changes that we'd like to make, I'd entertain a motion to accept the meeting minutes from January 14th, 2019.
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, abstentions. Okay, item number 6 is our first public comment period, privilege of the floor. We've allocated 15 minutes. If any member of the public who does not see themselves on the agenda later would like to comment or ask questions, now is the time. Any public comment? Going once. Twice. No public comment is sold. And, I'm gonna hang on one second. That's
Just the way.
not public.
That is not-
All right. Perfect timing. Because you're up. We have our annual audit report from Insero and Company. Dwayne Schoen of Insero is going to talk to us about our annual village audit for the period ending May 2018.
I know you've received electronic copies of these.
Hi, I'm good, how are you? That's good.
These are still in draft form only because by the time we were able to get in touch with the village attorney to make sure that nothing had changed, and then got this response, it was too late to finalize everything today. So, but everything, all the numbers that are in here are fine. There's not going to be any changes from the draft to the final. As I said, we got word from the village attorney late this afternoon, and so Now we just need to kind of cross a couple Ts and dot a couple Is, and then we'll be issuing this in final form. Okay. So what you have on top is the communication letter that I wanted to touch on briefly if I could, and then the management comment letter is the next thing that you've got, and then the report itself. Auditing standards require that we communicate certain things with the board once the audit is concluded. And so on an annual basis, we issue this communication letter to make sure that you're aware of all the things that you need to be aware of with respect to the audit process.
Our board member joined.
No, okay.
Who is it?
How's the sound?
Not good.
How's the sound, Keith?
That sounds pretty good.
Okay, terrific.
Better than it sounds here.
So the communication letter tells you that there were no changes in accounting policies in the village during the year. Any estimates that are an inherent part of financial statements, and they're always part of financial statements, are evaluated by us for reasonableness, for consistency on an annual basis. Disclosures that are part of the financial statements are evaluated for consistency, for neutrality, for clarity, to make sure that there's nothing in there, and we didn't find anything in there. No significant difficulties in the audit process, no disagreements with management during the audit process. Beginning on page 2 and continuing through the top half of page 3 are descriptions of some of the changes that were made from the beginning to the end of the audit process. Most of these are the same types of changes that we've made in the past, and are really, a lot of closing entries, making sure that receivables are recorded properly, making sure that payables are recorded properly. And then the last couple of things at the bottom of page 3, no other findings or issues to present to you, other than what's in the communication letter and in the comment letter. So that's it for the communication letter. The comment letter is the next document underneath it. The comment letter just mentions any findings or any issues. Really, regardless of how significant they might be, the comment letter is usually reserved for things that are pretty insignificant overall. So these are not things that I'm particularly concerned about. These are just things that, for your awareness more than anything else, we want to make sure that they're here for you. Okay. Couple issues at the bottom of the first page. With respect to beginning fund balances, there were some changes made during the audit process again, mostly because the prior year adjustments weren't given to Vicki in time for her to get everything updated. So some of the beginning fund balance numbers in the 17-18 presentation were adjusted because of that. We did have a couple of funds where we had some additional accrual adjustments, additional accounts payable adjustments that we made during the audit process. So that's noted at the top of page 2. A little bit in the general fund, but mostly in the capital fund as it relates to continuing project expenditures. We made some adjustments there. In the middle of page 2, there's reference to overspending a little bit in the general fund. And so, on an annual basis, there's always kind of, as part of the year-end closing process, making sure that if there are any areas where there's a little bit of overspending, that it's covered by other areas. That was done, but in the general fund, it couldn't be done completely. So there's a little bit of an overspending. We'll touch on that when we look at the details in the general fund. And then beginning at the bottom of page 2 and continuing Into page 3 are just some references to upcoming changes in governmental accounting standards. The Governmental Accounting Standards Board is continually making changes and updates on an annual basis. So there are some changes upcoming. I don't think that these changes are going to be all that dramatic for you. The one that will probably have a little bit of an impact, depending on whether or not the village has any even operating, even month-to-month leases, are going to be accounted for a little bit differently once Statement 87 takes effect. And so that's noted at the bottom of the middle of page 3 for the May 31, 2021 presentation. Accounting for leases is going to change a little bit. It's going to be much more balance sheet focused. There's a fairly low bar, and anything that exceeds that fairly low bar has to be accounted for as if it was a loan type of arrangement rather than a just monthly payment type of arrangement. So some changes will potentially come when that new statement takes effect. Okay, so those are the 2 letters, and then the financial statements themselves. I don't want to read every page for you, but I do want to hit some of the highlights, point to a few places in here, and certainly give you the opportunity to ask any questions. The first couple of pages after the index are the auditor's opinion. We're issuing what's called an unmodified opinion on your financial statements. This is also known as a clean opinion. It means that we believe the financial statements are fairly stated and that they don't require any modifications in order to be in compliance with accounting for governments. Beginning on page 3 and then continuing for several pages is the management's discussion and analysis. If you are not somebody who's necessarily adept at reading financial statements, not somebody that does it regularly, I would really encourage you to read that management's discussion and analysis, because in a few pages, in a fairly readable format, it gives you a sense of where things are in the village from a financial standpoint. It doesn't give you all the detail of the financial statements. It doesn't go into the detail of all the numbers, but it does give you some fairly high-level trend analysis, where things are this year versus a year ago. The management's discussion and analysis also gives you some information about capital assets, about debt, and about how the information that's occurring in the May 2018 fiscal year is affecting future years, 2018-19 principally. So again, I'd encourage you to read through that if you haven't already. Accounting for Governments presents your financial statements in 2 different formats. There is what's called the fund basis format, which is what you're probably used to seeing on a month-to-month, on a regular basis. You've got each fund separated with a balance sheet and a statement of revenues and expenditures. You also have what's called the government-wide presentation, which takes all those funds, combines them all, includes the village's capital assets and long-term debt, and does a single column format to give you what's called a government-wide presentation and give you a look at the village's financial picture as a whole. The government-wide presentation is page 4 and page 5 of the bound document. So page 4 gives you a statement of net position and balance sheet. On a government-wide presentation, in this government-wide presentation, it tells you the government's net assets were about $8.5 million. Most of that is capital in nature. Roughly $6.5 million out of that $8.5 million is net capital assets. Capital assets less related debt is that $6.5 million. About $1.7 million is restricted, basically money that's in your reserve funds. And so the unrestricted portion of that is a little bit less than $500,000, the very last couple of numbers on page 4. Okay. Again, those numbers don't necessarily relate to fund balance because it's that government-wide presentation. On page 5 is the statement of activities. Again, this is also that government-wide presentation. Page 5 tells you that net position increased by roughly $1.2 million during the fiscal year as a result of roughly $3.1 million in program revenues, charges for services, operating grants from state and federal government, capital grants, offset for the most part the expenses that the village had in all of its funds. There was roughly $250,000 of expenses less the program revenues, and then the general revenues, property taxes, sales taxes, and other revenues brought in about $1.4 million. That resulted in the roughly $1.2 million increase in your net position. And you can see the very bottom number on page 5 again is that $8.5 million in net assets. The fund basis presentation begins on page 6, and so this is where you'll see the numbers that you're probably more familiar with on a regular basis, because you've got each fund separated. You've got the assets, the liabilities, and the fund balance for each of those funds separated. You can see at the bottom of page 6, total fund balance amongst all the funds is a deficit of about $7 million because the capital project fund is showing a deficit of about $9 million. And that deficit is a result of short-term financing that's in the capital fund. So that short-term financing shows up as a liability in the capital fund until it's converted to long-term debt. And then once it's converted, it'll be taken out of the capital projects fund, and that'll eliminate the deficit. So you can see the bond anticipation notes payable number in that capital project fund is around $9.5 million at the end of the fiscal year. So again, once that $9.5 million is converted to long-term debt, the deficit of the capital projects fund will be eliminated. Page 8 is the statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance. So this shows you the revenues, the expenditures of each of the funds, and you can see the net change in fund balance at the bottom of page 8. You can see that the general fund lost about $60,000 in fund balance during the 17-18 fiscal year. Water and sewer funds also had losses during the year. The water fund was about $150,000, the sewer fund a little bit more than $100,000. And so in total, across all of the funds, including that capital projects fund, the funds of the village decreased about $900,000 from end of 17 to the end of 18. The notes to the financial statements begin on page 11. The notes summarize the village's significant accounting policies, which didn't change, as I mentioned, and then provide some details on some of the balance sheet lines, some of the other revenues and expense lines. I want to point to just a couple of them for you, rather than go into detail on all of them. On page 22 of the bound packet, note 5 is an analysis of capital assets. So you can see the changes in capital assets during the year, the depreciation that was recorded on those assets during the year. There was roughly $400,000 worth of depreciation expense. The depreciation expense isn't recorded in the fund basis presentation, but it is recorded in the government-wide presentation. Additions to capital assets were a little bit less than $2 million during the year, mostly construction in progress on the continuing capital projects, and then a little bit in other types of assets. And so on a net basis, capital assets increased by roughly $1.5 million during the fiscal year. The very next page is note 6, which relates to the bond anticipation notes. So you can see all the bond anticipation notes outstanding. On page 23, again, about $9.5 million in total. The activity is at the bottom of page 23, of almost $1.1 million in new bond anticipation notes were issued during the fiscal year, and about $300,000 was redeemed, was paid off during the fiscal year. Long-term debt begins on the next page. So note 7 shows you the long-term debt that the village has outstanding. In total, including bonds, installment purchase debt, roughly $1.6 million in bonds were outstanding at the end of the year. The village paid off about $200,000 in long-term debt during the year, so that balance has come down as you continue to make payments on that long-term debt. And then at the very bottom of page 25 is just a chart that shows you, how those bonds are going to mature individually over the next 5 years, and then beyond that in 5-year increments, going all the way up to 2035, where the final bond payments are going to be made on the current long-term debt. Once you take that $9.5 million in bond anticipation notes and convert it to long-term debt, these numbers obviously are going to change once you add to the long-term debt. I want to just reference, we've talked about the last couple of years. Fairly recently, there were some significant changes in the way that governments account for pensions. And so every year we've kind of noticed or noted for you the pension footnote. The pension footnote is note 9. It begins on page 26. And basically what this note, or what the pension accounting does now, is the statewide system is not quite fully funded. It's pretty close. But the state employee retirement, as well as the police and fire retirement systems, hire an actuary to come in, evaluate the plan, the statewide plan, determine what that deficit is at the statewide level, and then allocate a sliver of it to all of the local municipalities that participate in the statewide plan. Okay, so the village has a small share of that statewide liability, which has been allocated to it. And at the very bottom of page 27, you'll see those numbers. The ERS allocation to the village is about $88,000. The PFRS allocation is about $27,000. Okay. And so those are what the actuary has calculated your share to be. The percentages below that are your share of the statewide liability. So ERS is 0.0027%, and PFRS is about the same percentage. I wanted to skip a little bit ahead. I wanted to point out, we talked about the overexpended budget lines. Those are on page 35 is where you'll see it. And you can see the right-hand column on this page is the variance page. So this shows the original budget, the final budget with any amendments that the board made during the year, the actual activity, and then all the way over at the right, the variance columns. And you can see that there are a few lines on that right-hand column that are overexpended. And because the total fund was a little bit overexpended, you couldn't jump anymore and move budget dollars around in order to offset any deficits. You can see the next couple of pages, the water fund and sewer fund didn't have over expenditures. And then the last thing that I wanted to point out, because we do the audit in accordance with government auditing standards, we have to issue a separate report on your internal control and compliance. And that report is the very last couple of pages, page 42 and 43. We identified no material weaknesses, no significant deficiencies, and no non-compliance that we had to report. And with that, I will open it up to questions.
Did you bring our gold stars?
I'll bring them when I bring them.
All right, as long as I get one.
Any questions for Joel?
So, not there would be better handles than that person, so no questions.
I did read the draft report you sent to us. We appreciate all the work you always do. I had one question unrelated to this.
Yep.
You and I had a conversation last spring after S&P did our re-rating evaluation.
Right.
About the fact that we use a non-GAAP cash basis accounting for the ambulance and fire revenue and how that's somewhat unique to a municipality to have that situation.
Yep.
Would you still be willing to issue a letter of some kind of outlining what that is and why?
Yep.
That I think would be helpful, although it's not part of this report specifically. It would be nice to have it because
Sure.
I had a really tough time not explaining it. I had a tough time getting the S&P folks to understand it.
Right.
Because they just don't see it.
Sure.
They don't see it in their municipalities that they
Right.
cover. So,
Right. Yeah.
okay.
Yep. Yep. Okay.
Anything else?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you next time.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Thanks. Mike.
Okay.
Next room.
Item number 8 on the agenda, Farmers Market. Don Schlatter and Julia Arrear.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
I'm Don Schlatter. This is Julia Derriere.
Nice to meet you.
And this is my third year on the market board. And we're actually very excited to have Julia come aboard as the market manager. We have a very active board this year. It's the busiest that I've seen us be in. We understand there are a number of things that are really good about our market, but we also see some things that need to be taken care of with the market. So we're actively engaged in trying to correct course where it needs to be and enhance what is good already. Julia is coming aboard to help us do that and probably spearhead a good portion of what we ask her to do. So this is your chance to just get to meet her.
Great. Welcome.
Thank you. So just a little bit about myself. I grew up in New Jersey and went to Southwest Virginia to Virginia Tech to study business. I one day really want to open up my own business, so I decided to study entrepreneurship and learn about that. Through my studies, I decided that the corporate route was not for me, so I was able to get a part-time job working at a small 5-acre permaculture farm, and I realized that I loved growing food. Once I graduated, I decided to move up full-time there and continued. The next season, I became farm manager there and was responsible for the farm crew and volunteers, and I really just loved learning how to grow food, and I love farming. So after 3 seasons working for them, I decided to move back a little bit closer to home to Trumansburg. I live on Frontenac Road in Trumansburg now and wanted to advance my career in agriculture. So I'm really happy to be here. This is one of the best places to be as far as farming, and I'm so happy to be part of such a vibrant local community. People seem to really stress not only just eating good food, but just being active in the community. So I'm really excited to be market manager. I know, having been a farmer, a lot of the obstacles that come with growing your own food or just being a small business owner. So I hope to create a profitable opportunity at the farmers market, as well as a really fun place for the community to engage.
Great. Comments or questions for Don or Julia?
Welcome.
Thank you.
I do have one question. In my conversations with Don, one of the things that's come up, and I know I've heard from others, what do you plan, or what are your thoughts in terms of driving consistency in foot traffic, throughout the farmers market season? Just in general, how do you think you want to tackle that piece?
So Julia may already had ideas, but it's probably a little unfair on her since she just came aboard. But basically, we are intent upon expanding the advertisement. One of the things we've discovered that there are a lot of people in the village that actually aren't even aware of the market or forget that it's going on. So we want to actively make sure that people are aware that, oh, it's Tuesday or Wednesday, it's now Wednesday, and that's the market day. We have kind of a long-term plan to work with the chamber to develop this notion of T-Bird Wednesdays, and just try to get this in the regional basis for people to start thinking of Trumansburg, or when it rolls around to be Wednesday, they just go, it's Wednesday, Trumansburg, let's go there. This is happening, you can go here, that kind of thing. So it's kind of a long-term program we want to start putting together, and this year will be the baby steps for that. We want to become more actively engaged in social media advertising, especially Julia's got a good handle on that kind of thing, as well as one of our board members, as well as I think you do as well. And I don't. We're going to be doing some print advertising in some of the outer line areas in a little bit here, but that's, we're relying upon that. It's not going to be a major thing, frankly, because of the expense. We're trying to find the places where we can make the dollars go the furthest. That's basically the thing. But we're very clear that for this market to succeed for the vendors, it has to have more people there. And for it to succeed, for people to want to come, it has to have what they want there. So, we're kind of addressing both those things at the same time. And, there's some issues that we're working on. It's not an easy do, but it's certainly a doable thing.
Good.
I don't know if that didn't quite
No, that's
answer
good.
everything, but you can add whatever you want.
Just like what you said, and I think talking to the board, we have a lot of different exciting ideas to make that happen. Some of them include just a really strong initial advertising push in the beginning of the season, so people are aware that it's happening, and then just consistent engagement throughout, be it through advertising through publications or social media posting, which is great because social media is really cheap and it's how a lot of people connect nowadays. So increasing that engagement. We have some really cool ideas possibly with TCAT to get people out here who typically wouldn't have the opportunity. And really also making sure as a market manager that I do consistent reporting on how many people we are getting at the market each week, so that we can really test those metrics and see if things are working and adjust accordingly.
So, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great to meet everybody.
Thank you. Welcome.
Yes, we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
All right, sounds good. Is Keith not on?
No, he's dealing with stuff.
Got it. Item number 9 on the agenda is reports from representatives, in which I see 2. And after you.
So I like the new practice of having food for your meeting, so
Yeah.
I'm sure I don't miss any.
Thank Nancy for that.
So first off, I just want to mention the issue that happened with the sheriff's department. Folks have heard about that. That a deputy had come across somebody who was undocumented and called ICE about it. And so ICE came and took the person away, unfortunately. So the sheriff's department was also trying to make sure that person has a lawyer. So what we found out was that when we, in 2017, I was a legislator when I remember it happening, so the county didn't exactly make the county a sanctuary county. There was a couple of reasons for that. One of the main ones being that the federal government at that point threatened and is actually threatened again this week to withdraw funding for any counties or any municipality that called themselves a sanctuary city or municipality. So we have we have the essence of it. We passed that as a resolution. And so what we found out was the sheriff's department didn't change at that point any regulations or didn't pass down that information to ask their staff to not call ICE. So legally, we don't have to call ICE, and apparently there was no guidelines changed with the sheriff's department. And so we have a different sheriff now, and so he quickly got on that within a day or two, got a policy and met with staff. So that was an unfortunate incident. And let's see, February is African American Month, and the county passed a resolution for that, and also is flying some African American flags too around the county. Sales tax is up again. I have December, November, I don't know if I told you guys November was up, but December, December was actually down from the previous year. As far as, it was down about 7% overall, almost 8% overall. And that was partly because it was up, we thought artificially 17% the year before, and we're not sure why. So it's still up overall, averaging. And then for the year, this is for the county, overall for the year, we're up 5.4% from the previous year, 2017. And then for the distribution to municipalities, for the year, it was up 6.4%. So that's still good overall. And you might have heard, well, I'm not sure if you guys heard, but county had planned to, had opened up bids to log some of the forests in Newfield and Caroline that the county owns to try and clean up some of the old stands that were there. We're trying to promote old growth and a couple other reasons, but we didn't get any bids on that, so we won't be doing that for at least a year if we're gonna do anything else. And I know Nancy, I spoke with Nancy, so you guys are aware of the municipality or the municipal housing affordability grants and the other one for parks, and I guess the application isn't out yet, right?
I understand.
Okay. And I went to a county or a statewide county conference in Albany for a couple of days last week, and the big issue there was everybody was talking about hemp, recreational marijuana, and CBD. So CBD, in case folks don't know, is cannabis in an oil format, and that it doesn't have the THC to get you high, but it just has the medical benefits. So CBD is already, it's not that it's legal, but it's not regulated. So people are already selling it around Ithaca and around New York State. And hemp is already legal as far as farming it. And recreational marijuana, the governor has announced within the next couple of months that he's going to, or hopefully, I'm not saying hopefully, but if he gets together with the Senate and Assembly, they're gonna, the plan is to pass something to allow recreational marijuana to be legal for people age 21 and up. Those were the big things.
Okay, any questions for you? Thank you. Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, I don't have a question for you now. I was wondering, the audit, is that available anywhere to look at?
It will be when we have final form. It's still draft. When they, probably in the next week or two, he'll have final
Will
bound
it be
format,
on the web, on the village site, or will it just be in a hard form in the office?
hard form in the office.
Okay, good, thanks.
One last thing I forgot, the county, for this year is looking to, increase its electric car, stock to up to 27 electric cars. So, we're doing a lot of research on that, so if you guys are looking, I don't know if you have any village vehicles, but do you guys have any village vehicles?
We have several village vehicles, none of them are electric.
So if you're looking at that down the future, we're doing a whole lot of research on it and hiring a consultant to help us with that. So if you do look for one down the road, please contact the planning department and we can figure that out once we do.
Good. All right, Nancy.
Yeah, I want to just thank you all again. I know it's asking you to start your meeting day at 5:30 to talk with the towns and check with you for fire and EMS was an extra, but we appreciate the opportunity to have that kind of a more informal discussion, as we know you're going through your budget process, so thanks for that. I was on less certain last month, but now, since then, the town board has voted to accept the grant that will enable us to rebuild the bridge on Cemetery Road. And so we're actually getting some good help from the county highway department, some advice on that, and we'll probably be getting some help from MRP, but we're learning about the many steps in the process, but we're committed to making sure the bridge is safe and repaired. I can't even, we're not even close to telling you when that would actually be closed down for repair or reopened, new and improved, but we are gonna seize that opportunity. We are also entering what I think we're all hoping is the last chapter of our last phase of our zoning update. And Wednesday night of this week at the town hall from 7 to 9, we're having an open house where people can come and hear about sort of what the proposed changes are. We've got lots of maps, so part of what we're doing is have people come in and say, most people are concerned, say, okay, well, if I have, this is my property, what can I do or not do under the proposed zoning, and get their specific questions answered. We are in the middle of, all the newest documents are posted on our website, and we've got an open comment period until the 18th of February. Then we'll take a look at that. Based on that, we may make some final tweaks, then get that into a final form, have a public hearing. So over the next couple of months, we expect to sort of be honing in on some changes. We've got our Salo Habitat Advisory Committee is going to be meeting next week, and I'll probably be, based on the agreement that we entered, following up with reaching out to Dusty to have him take a look at the space, and hopefully have our highway superintendent join in that. So together we can be looking at how do we really need to do, what do we need to do to get that 3-spot parking area properly excavated, properly gravel, and with our supplies, and how do we work that all out. So that's coming up, but we also, just so you know, that we, virtually all of the neighbors to the Habitat, we sent an individual letter to each neighbor saying, hello, town, here's your new neighbor, we purchased the Habitat, here's some things we've done so far, here's our thinking about, some issues for the future. There is an advisory committee, an opening line. It completely spaced me out, but I will make sure you get copies of that letter so you see what your residents have gotten, and based on that, apparently it's circulated a little bit, and we heard from somebody else. Is Kentucky in the village? So a Kentucky road resident followed up and had ideas for us and, was interested in getting involved. So I'll make sure to get that letter. We will tomorrow night be at our town board meeting, and at that meeting, we are planning to adopt this is on our agenda, to adopt a resolution opposing the governor's proposed cuts in aid to municipalities. Cut by zeroing out our money, we had budgeted $33,545, which is the amount of that funding has been. And in fact, mid-year, when they adopt the budget, that's gone. That leaves that size hole in our budget to be filled either with reserves or future cuts. Nobody likes, we'd rather know what our resources are on the front end and plan accordingly. So we are closing, who knows what will come of that. The other thing we'll be doing is we've been putting money in our equipment reserve, and now it's time we need to get a new truck for the highway department and a new set of plows for it. So we'll be hopefully moving that money out subject to a permissive referendum. And we did, as Ann said, I have to go to the county grant workshop and provided information. I assume you shared that or dropping up some ideas. I think the town's application on the recreation side of things will probably this year be focused on the Jacksonville Community Association Park. They're trying to do some amenity improvements there, and we're hoping this grant might be an opportunity to do that, but we still have to work out the details and actually fill that application out when it becomes available and get some sign off from the town on the way. So that's it, Russ.
Questions for Nancy? That we didn't already talk about an hour ago. Thanks, Nancy.
I was just gonna say, I don't know if there's, any thinking going on, either on your part about what you might be interested in doing, either for the housing grant or the rec grant, but if there's any overlap or any opportunity to, they're individual grants, but, if we were collaborating on anything, that probably might be interesting for them to know that that's.
So I passed the park one along to the farmer's market.
Okay, good.
To see if they can make use of it there and kind of come back with ideas. On the affordable housing one, I looked over what would qualify, and I kind of struggled to find something that really fit the bill there. If there's ideas that come across your way, I'm happy to kind of have a conversation there with it. The immediacy of it made it difficult. The kind of 9 month.
It's a small amount of money and they're looking for concrete results, but
Yeah,
mostly I think that the approach is with a mini grant, the municipality would be enabled to hire a consultant to do either to move a project that's been on the drawing board forward with grant applications. So they could write some grant application, identify some grant application, grant resources, and perhaps submit a grant application to help move a project if we have one. I don't know, I haven't yet had a chance to discuss this with the town board, but my thinking has been very sort of, very preliminary in saying, well, maybe what the town needs to do if we got a grant like that is to do a housing inventory. Like what's the quality of our housing stock in the town, like what different types. The focus for the county is to promote more affordable housing. But housing inventory might tell us sort of what our housing stock is, how much affordable housing do we have now? I'm not sure exactly what housing inventories do, you probably know more.
More versus rental.
Yeah, that kind of a thing. And then we'd be in a position to, having that information, it might be next year that we'll think about either applying for something that would help us leverage money to either refurbish what we've got to keep affordable house, good quality affordable housing available and or develop more, so. But I'd be happy to chat with you, because like, if we were to do something like that, I mean, the town applying as the town is sort of like the town outside of the village, but that, I don't know how much, I mean, most of the housing is obviously in the village, and we have less scattered around town, but, you know, I'm not quite sure, I know it well enough to figure it out, but David West, who's at the planning department, has said he's open to talking to people, so, you know, we want to just,
Right, and the thought that's on my mind is that we are kind of just kicking off the comprehensive plan review, and there might be pieces that could be, wouldn't work for that specifically, but maybe parts could be woven in there, or deliverables in that larger project could be kind of carved out for this. So as you're saying, the housing study, maybe that's an input into our comprehensive plan conversation, so it's an interesting thought, definitely something to kind of keep building on.
Yeah, and I mean, actually developing some, being able to, I know you're also looking at your zoning and being able to say sort of how might your zoning be tweaked in ways that make it possible for more affordable housing there, or targeting that, or mixed income housing is really, I think, more of what people are hoping to promote.
Yeah.
So. Yeah.
Anything else for Nancy? All right, item number 10 on the agenda is board member report, starting with,
Maybe he's back on, he's gonna grab it. He's got his name on
yeah, it's been there for a while.
Yeah,
Oh, it has been?
he's busy.
it. Oh, you know what, it's been right in the, like,
Oh,
arm bar, I haven't
Yeah.
seen it, anyhow, I'll leave that. Sure, so I can kick it off, on the fire front, as Nancy mentioned, we had a conversation earlier with the towns around thinking about that and budgeting. I have been, as part of that, going forward, working through some replacement schedules that I know we'll kind of continue to hone in on around the equipment and the apparatus there. In that vein, we did sell the previous chief's vehicle Tahoe for $13,500. That just closed this evening. Sold to another municipality, so that's great news. We were kind of holding off on that for quite a while, trying to get a buyer at the right price point, so that's great. On the CPZR front, we had, I wasn't able to attend, but I know Gordon was, and a number of the other members of the committee were able to attend a presentation from EDR, a potential consultant that we might bring on for that project. And from all I've heard, that was a great, well-received presentation, and the committee as a whole would like to recommend that we move forward with hiring them as a consulting firm. I'm not quite sure if I don't know if we've got an actual letter or anything with them.
There's an email in the Dropbox from the chair of the committee. And if I can get it to open. Says simply, Dear Mayor Hart, the Comprehensive Plan and Zoning Review Committee formally requests that the village board hire EDR to be the consulting firm for our review process.
So I don't know without
It
a-
does ask that we confirm with them the current quote as being capable of sustaining a fairly heavy rewrite. But I think we had already discussed that with Jane from EDR.
She did call today just to check in.
So I don't know if we've got enough to have how to move that forward, I guess. I'm not quite sure what's the next step.
We would need a resolution to engage EDR as our consultant
Yeah.
for the Comp Plan Zoning Review Committee.
So I'd like to make a resolution that we engage EDR as our consultant for the Comp Plan Review Committee.
We don't need a contract or anything attached to that?
We had their RFP, so we would be, friendly amendment, we would be accepting the terms of the RFP as submitted.
Accepting that amendment. Yeah, that was kind of, I was poorly asking, was like, what are we actually accepting here?
But once we accept that, then they will send us any paperwork that we need to sign.
Great.
Any additional discussion on EDR?
No, I'm happy it was unanimous recommendation. that sounds,
They
makes
were,
it easier to.
It was
they were,
exciting. You were at the EDR show? I was, yeah. And I think I heard good things from you as well, so.
Yeah, I believe you did, yeah.
Great.
all right, then if there's no additional discussion, all in favor of engaging EDR as our comp plan zoning review consultant, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, abstentions.
And then we already heard from the farmer's market folks, looking forward to a good season there.
We do need a resolution to accept
Oh, yes.
their hiring of Julia Ariran as the,
So I would like to, yes, move that we accept the recommendation from the farmer's market board to hire Julia Ariran, butchering that name, as the farmer's market manager for this season.
Second.
motion in a second, any discussion? If not, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed, abstentions. Okay. Anything else, Ben?
That is it for me. Oh, sorry, I actually did one other thing that I'm trying to get in the habit of, I want to start, giving the fire report, as Keith typically does. Let me pull that up here. Okay, there we are. So for the month of January, there were 11 calls to Trumansburg, 14 to the town of Ulysses, 9 to Covert, 1 to Hector, and 7 to mutual aid for a total of 42 calls to service. And there were, 227.5 hours of training, 235.99 hours of service for a total of 464.92 hours of service. That's the report there.
I feel like I should add that I saw pictures of them doing an ice rescue training. And I didn't know how to process that information. I was both impressed and appalled. That was the thing that they chose to do.
You should see Confined Space Rescue.
Oh, no.
If you're claustrophobic, that is
Yeah.
some education.
Yeah. Seeing Morocco in a big thing in the ice water, that sounds great.
I just want to emphasize that he chose to do that. That was an option.
That's what a lot of them you said. Yeah, that's a thing.
They are different.
All right, EMS, youth and stack.
Stack. Word that.
That's a good acronym.
When I first wrote that, it was stab. So, stack is
I like stack. Southern Tier Athletic.
So with youth, this is no surprise to Nancy and Gordon, but the three of us met with Liz to have a discussion sort of generally focused on how to expand recreational options in the TV village, school, and primarily how do we, or can we, is there a good way to expand the rec director position to a full-time or a year-round, or how to go in that direction? I'm sort of stuttering over this. The idea is to go to a part-time year-round rec director, and how to make that happen is something that the youth commission and group has been talking about since I've been here. Something that I think the community has been talking about probably since before I was born. It's a long-term community project, and I think we made good progress as far as planning that out. It seems like one likely scenario is that we basically pass our youth programming off to the town, where it will meet with other programming that's currently run through the town, the program manager, the youth commission oversees, and all of that. And I want to emphasize that this is all purely theoretical. This was a brainstorming session than anything else. But we're starting to work through that. It felt good to have that conversation in that way. EMS, as I mentioned in our earlier session of this meeting, we have our EMS executive committee meeting on the 20th. Tim?
Yes,
Not the 18th.
not the 18th. It's a holiday.
Oh, right. I've shown up in the holiday. So I'll have more to report then, as I also mentioned We've been looking through personnel policies. You know, we have, obviously, hopefully everyone is aware that we have something overtime crisis. And I say crisis intentionally. I thought long and hard about whether to use that word, and I think that is the word. So how we can sort of overcome that in the short term, the immediate, which maybe is too late already. But anyway, we'll be discussing that, and hopefully I'll be coming back with some productive steps to take. As far as the tree committee goes, I sent a draft to Guy and to a sort of group of community, people in the community that we felt like were either just interested, like we sent it to Jules and Patty because Jules had expressed an interest, but also to people like Andy Hillman and Marvin Pritz, who are, the experts in the field. So we got a lot of good feedback. Guy's feedback was somewhat concerning. He was concerned about an old inventory that had been done of our trees and the legal implications as far as liability goes for that audit or that inventory. Basically, we have an old inventory that says almost across the board, every tree in the village needs work in one way or another. Either this needs to come down and that obviously, so if any of those happen or anything bad happens there, and you look at this inventory, it feels like we should have done something proactively and we didn't. The reality of that is that because every tree listed needs work in some capacity, it's impossible to prioritize, so it ends up sort of being a stalemate. I don't think it's actually actionable for us in any way, so I haven't quite figured out how to grapple with that. But I'll be talking with Deb, I think Dusty probably, some sort of short-term solution to that problem. But that's all.
Anything for Ben? Okay, trustee Watkins is excused. Unfortunately, trustee Hannan is also excused, which takes us to treasurer.
I have two resolutions. One is a budget modification, the other one is a resolution. The first one is the budget modification to allocate $12,231 from the general fund unappropriated fund balance to the AM fund, which is the billing fund, to pay the town of Gilbert and the town of Ulysses for EMS services from October of 2011 through May of 2018.
What's the total?
$12,231.
Even.
Yes.
So to clarify, this is the amount that the state comptroller found that Ulysses and Covert had overpaid in MedX billing fees over the 8-year period from 2011 to 2018. So I would entertain a motion to accept this resolution.
Yeah, so.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion?
That's the combined amount.
That's what we have to move to the ambulance fund to then cut the separate checks. There's a balance in the ambulance fund.
So, yeah,
So-
combine.
So to make up the difference, we have to move 12,000 and change.
Right. I was just curious of the town, sure.
Yeah, I think Ulysses on its own is 16.
No, it's 15 and change. I think it
Oh,
was
I see,
15
so
and
to
change.
be able to write
Yeah.
those two
Yeah.
checks, you need it back.
Right. Any additional discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions. Okay.
The second is a premise of referendum to appropriate from the summer recreation reserve account the amount of $3,477 for over expenditures of the summer rec budget. The total amount, oh God, I can't, sorry, I did not write down the total amount, but the town agreed to pay $2,200, the village agreed to pay $2,200, and then we would take the difference out of the reserve account that we had both put money in at one point.
And the idea was that we would be paying, basically we would pay half out of the reserve, and half, I guess, out of pocket, for lack of a better word. And at that point, we didn't know exactly what the overage was going to be, so it's a little less than that, but it's.
Can you repeat those numbers with the total, was it $3,477?
Yeah, that's a permissive referendum.
Okay. So
We
confused.
don't need any of this.
Yeah, I see that now. Gotcha.
Yeah, so I move that we appropriate from the summer recreation reserve $3,477 to cover over expenditures for the budget.
Second. Friendly amendment that's subject to permissive referendum. Any additional discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, abstentions. Anything else?
No, working on budgets, that's all. Check the Dropbox daily, because I do work on it daily, sometimes things come up. I did make almost all the corrections that we had discussed. I'm waiting, Mary Chapel was out sick regarding the sidewalk question of using the ban money. Jason answered the question. I think everything else is done except for I'm waiting on Mary's.
Did you know, let me know when you hear from her.
Did you talk with Lynette? Wasn't there a list for her?
No, I'm also working on making sure the money is all balanced.
Right, I saw that.
I can tell you the question. The EMS rate sheet Tammy's gonna get for me, so that I need to call Lynette. I did the police,
And also
you were right, I had added the police health insurance, I fixed that. DPW telephone distribution, I did, which is subject to change when Debbie decides if she's going to reappropriate. I talked to Dusty about the confirmation of if we're on the hook for 1920 for 20,000, if we decide to give up the thing to Cat, he's going to call Cat because he has, and Jason gave me the reason for the fire equipment reserve in the budget. I put a note in there for you guys. I guess that's it.
Okay, any questions for Vicki? All right, next up is clerk.
I don't have a whole lot to report. I am happy to have Miss Morgan as our deputy clerk, and I'm actually just working with Morgan, trying to teach her some things and work on my own things in the meantime. So I've spent a lot of time on EMS and police this month. It's been my priority and focus along with Morgan. Unless anybody has any specific questions.
Questions for Tammy?
In meetings, I've been at a lot of meetings.
I don't have anything specific. This month, I guess I will mention the deer management program as of last night was up to 49 deer taken, which is up from last year. But beyond that, I don't have anything to add. Item number 11 is acknowledgement of correspondence. We didn't have any specific correspondence addressed to this board since last month, which takes us to item number 12 is old business. We had scheduled the public hearing for the changes to the vehicle and traffic law, but then didn't notice it for tonight. So we're going to reschedule. No need to reintroduce, but we're going to reschedule those changes for the March meeting,
Which has been, the date has been changed to.
which is
7th.
Thursday, March 7th. At which time we'll have the public hearing for.
And this is updated on the calendar on the website, I think, so just to take a note of
Yeah, no, I haven't done it, but I will. Yep.
Did you post a legal notice?
Of this?
Yeah,
No, that's what I'm gonna do in the morning.
that's March.
You betcha. I won't drop it again, I promise.
The only other update under old business is we are in the process of adding the Municipay links to the website. I would expect to see that up and running in the next week or so, at which time residents will be able to click on a drop-down, choose from a drop-down as to which village bill they would like to pay online, and then that will take them through to pass-through portal to Municipay's website for all of the cybersecurity protocols that are required for e-commerce. That'll actually be done on their end, but the choice as to how to pay or what you want to pay starts on the village side. Hope to have that up actually this week. Item number 13 on the agenda is new business. We had back in 2013 a fantastic discussion surrounding the adoption of rules to permit egg-laying chickens to be kept on property within the village. That local law, which is in the Dropbox, was set to sunset, or did sunset after 5 years, but allows for renewal by simple resolution. And so, the code enforcement officer has indicated that there have been very few, if any, issues with property owners. There are a handful of permits that have been issued over the last 5 years. And so he has asked, how do we want to proceed? So I don't know if there's any objection on the board to simply reauthorizing it by resolution. It would then be good for, I believe, another 5 years. Let me double check that. It says simply, unless extended by formal resolution. So it doesn't actually tell us how long we have to extend it for. So it's up to this board. I'm fine with going for another 5.
Sure, I move that we extend local law 5, 2013, called the rear yard and side yard chicken rules and regulations, another 5 years.
Second. Motion and a second. Any further discussion?
I just want to point out that this was my first thing that I did on the board.
It sure was.
So that makes
Really
this
sorry,
my 5-year anniversary.
Fond memories.
As someone who grew up with chickens, I'm excited to be able to extend this.
All right.
Gosh,
I'm
I wish
happy to-
Deb was here right now.
Yeah, that's
It'd be even better if Steve was
It
here.
would be even better if Mr. Watkins was here.
So hearing no additional comment, all in favor of renewing for a 5-year term the rear yard and side yard chicken rules and regulations, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions. The second item of new business is introducing local law 2 of 2019 entitled Proposed Property Tax Cap Override. We have done this every year since Albany decided that they knew how much local municipalities should be spending. And I'll read it very briefly. It's the same essentially as last year. It's a local law providing the flexibility and ability to override the tax levy limitations established by General Municipal Law, Section 3C. Being enacted by the Board of Trustees of the Village of Trumansburg, County of Tompkins as follows. It is the purpose and intent of this local law to allow, if determined necessary and or appropriate, for the Board of Trustees of the Village of Trumansburg to adopt a budget for the fiscal year commencing in 2019 that requires a real property tax levy that is in excess of the tax levy limit as defined by General Municipal Law, Section 3C. I'll skip the paragraph where we talk about what we think of Albany. Section 2, authority. This local law is adopted pursuant to subdivision 5 of General Municipal Law, section 3C. And the rest you can read online when it's posted. Essentially, when the village gets to determining what the budget and tax levy will look like if we are over the tax cap, then this law would allow us to pass that budget anyway. So we're simply introducing it tonight. I'd like to set the public hearing for it also on March the 7th. Unless there's any objection, we'll do both of those in the same night. So Thursday, March 7th, we will hold the public hearing on our annual tax cap override authorization. Which takes us to, that never happens, approval of abstracts. We have a general fund abstract in the amount of $268,887.33.
We'll go ahead and approve that abstract.
Second.
Did have two questions. Well, so the Spartan is the fire truck chassis, right? What was the repair? That was a big,
More rust. More than things.
that's what it is, another.
You want to talk about?
I mean, maybe I'll just ask you for the bill itself. At first, I was just confused by what a Spartan was. And then I realized.
We can have a Spartan instead.
Yeah, it's
We
like-
also had we also had gladiators upstairs.
Yeah.
That's what we do in our
These
free
Spartan
time.
expansions are real.
Yes, Spartans and gladiators.
But then the other question, there's a bill there for George DePay. Fleet management, what is that?
Because Chief has been using him to help, sort out purchasing a new vehicle.
He is
He's like a broker or something like that? Oh, okay, that's not the kind of fleet management I was hoping.
Well, that's what the bill says.
Alright, so that's just like.
Yeah.
Alright,
he doesn't buy.
that doesn't.
Ah, that makes complete sense.
Any other discussion on the general fund abstract? Hearing none, then all in favor of paying this abstract, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, abstentions. Next is the EMS billing abstract, which we just moved some money into, in the amount of $22,412.82.
Move that we approve the EMS billing abstract.
Second.
Motion and a second, any discussion? If not, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed, abstentions. We have a water fund abstract in the amount of $36,131.39.
Move that we approve water fund abstract.
A motion, do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
So I was just looking for the, just payroll in here. It's either really low.
What is-
Not in there, in the water fund?
It's gonna be all the trust and agency entries, pretty much.
Yeah, I mean,
So some of them are in here though, I mean, it's,
all the bills are in, yes.
Yeah, you got trust and agency on all two pages.
Mhm.
They're spread out too, which is a lot, right? Like if you looked at all the clerk lines specifically, it would add up as much like a couple $100 here.
right, yeah, I guess maybe that's just it.
I'm not equipped with the sewer too.
We have one DPW worker with his, most of his pay goes to water.
Right, that's what I thought it was just expecting more, not a lot, but that's all right. we can dig into that later if I find myself an extra.
Okay. Any other comment on the water fund abstract? All right, if not, all in favor of paying the water fund abstract, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, abstentions. Sewer fund abstract, $23,891.30.
We approve that sewer fund abstract.
Second.
Motion and a second, any discussion? If not, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed, abstentions. Is this the last one?
Yes, yes,
The actual
Officially, they-
last.
yes.
Capital project, Safe Routes to Schools, South Street sidewalk, in the amount of $4,215.01.
Move that we approve that capital project, Safe Routes to Schools abstract.
Second,
Motion and a second. Any discussion?
especially that one penny.
Otherwise, it'll show up again next month. All in favor then, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions. And last but not least, trust and agency abstracting the amount of $28,872.48. $25,575 of which is health insurance.
Will we get Medicare for all?
Move that
Double
we
that.
approve this trust and agency abstract.
We have a motion, do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, then all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions.
Abstain, sir.
True enough. Item number 15. We got lots of time, an hour.
Really?
Second public comment period, privilege of the floor. If anyone from the public would like to say anything, now is your golden opportunity. Yes, sir. Jack.
Hello, Jack Paxton, 2000 Street. Just from listening to the course of the meeting, there were a couple of things that came up. I just would like either clarified or just to give out some information. There are 103 affordable housing units in Trumansburg, not counting the Section 8 and other apartments that would fall into the affordable range if they were, officially counted. And that's over 25% of our rental stock. And does the village own the farmer's market?
Village owns the farmer's market property for sure.
Okay.
The farmer's market is technically a department of the village. However, the farmer's market board is independent. And the only way that I can wrap my mind around it is to think of it like the fire company. So the fire company is actually a not-for-profit corporation. The volunteers belong to the company, but the village owns the physical plant and the equipment. Farmer's market board, there's a weird section in New York State corporation law about farmers markets being an unincorporated association. And that's what they are. So they're not village employees per se, but the village operates the market for which the board interviews the manager, who is not a village employee. They're a 1099 subcontractor. So if you can,
I think I
Yeah.
sorted out. The Safe to School sidewalks project has been closed out now with this passing of the abstract. That's the last bill and we're done with that.
correct.
Okay, good. Is there any news on the zoning officer hire?
The application window closed at the end of January, and we have now actually just today received all of the applications, of which there were several. And then this board has to go through the process of sorting through the list, because there were quite a few actually, sorting through the list to see how we want to begin interviewing. And that's all we have at the moment.
Yeah, I was just wondering if my application that, remains current, it was on file, I guess. I don't know if it was, part of that process that, the new hire, but just.
I don't know if you resubmitted one for this cycle.
No, I
or
didn't
not.
resubmit, so.
You would need to resubmit, Jack.
Well, I guess I'll list down. One other thing is, the ZBA and the planning board are taking up, variances that are either 40 or 50% of the, currently permitted zoning for variance for parking numbers and for setbacks, which I had brought up before. I felt was like a legislative process, which is not, to be determined by an appointed board, but by elected officials. And I was just wondering if anybody had discussed this amongst yourselves or thought about it at all. And, because such a substantial change of 40 and 50% is tantamount to changing the zoning ordinance. So just bringing it up to see if.
My only comment is, and I won't comment about open applications before the other two boards, as you know. My only comment is that I would disagree, and state law also disagrees that the granting of a variance, no matter how large, is tantamount to changing the zoning. So if we read, and I actually was just looking at it last night for the troublemaker to your right, the Village Law Article 7 grants only to the ZBA the ability to grant variances. However, it does enumerate what they must consider in whether or not they grant the variance. And because a variance is property specific, there is no precedent setting terminology within that law. So if they grant you the variance for something on your property, does not mean they have to grant me the same variance for my property. It is case by case and property by property. So.
Right, but if it's the same pattern that was applied for, then they would have to follow precedent.
It's not a precedent-setting action, though. That's my point.
Well, most of their decisions have to be consistent with their past decisions, I believe. Not that necessarily every situation that comes up is exactly the same, but the reasoning must be, clearly pointed out and delivered as a written statement, I believe.
And I guess more to your question, because I did read your email that you sent to us. More to your point, the village board is not authorized or permitted by New York state law to tell a zoning board of appeals how to handle a variance application. And so if someone applies for a variance, even if it was for 100% of a particular law or rule, the ZBA has to adjudicate that. And if they adjudicate in a particular way, and there are examples of this in New York State, one actually ongoing at the moment, if they were to adjudicate in a way that the village board disagreed with, let's say the village board says that's not what we intended when we wrote that zoning, you shouldn't have granted that variance, the village board has to file an Article 78 against the village's own ZBA. And there is one actually ongoing in New York State now. So it's kind of a quirk once you start having separate quasi-judicial bodies empowered by state law to do certain things, you can find yourself in those strange situations.
Yeah, to be checkmate.
So I would just add, at a real broad strokes conceptual level, I'm inclined to agree with you. But the reality is that just the very nature of an appeal or variance will always imply that to some degree, right? So anytime you're getting a variance for the law, the implication is something's wrong with that law or something like that. So as a BZA, you have to be very careful and very aware of that line all the time. it isn't unique to one situation more or less than another. It's something that they always deal with, something that we have to trust them to deal with. That's really their job. I do hear the concern on that, but that's just the nature of their power, right?
Well, I trust them with it too. It's, just some court decisions have come down that there's a certain percentage of a variance that, is above and beyond, what substantial infers. But, that's neither here nor there, but I trust him to do the right thing. But I would think that such a substantial variance, even though not beyond their abilities and authorities, would be considered, at least by the Board of Trustees, as a subject to discuss about whether or not it should be a legislative or a board discretionary decision.
Well, I think to that point, just to take that one step further, if this board unanimously decided that should be a legislative decision, we have no authority to tell the ZBA how to rule on the variance application.
Right.
We can continue to review it through the zoning review process though, right? So if we look at that variance and we say, oh, that should become a legislative action or something like that, and we do have that power in the long term kind of a way.
Well, okay, I understand. I just was wondering if you had all, taken it up as a thought, that's all.
It's an interesting thought from all over, I think, in theory, but as far as actionable items for this board.
No, I realize that the ZBA has pretty much all the authority to grant 100% of variance, as you said. And probably in some small cases, when it's a difference of 10 feet or 5 feet, that's 100% and that's okay. But when it's something so substantial, I would think that would affect the whole village, that, it might be considered more legislative. And I realize that you don't have any power to make it so without, having a committee and, recommendations and whatnot. So,
I think what we're trying to say is even if we were to pass some sort of law to change the zoning one way or another, the variance could still be brought
Right.
forward and they still could adjudicate it. They kind of really, we don't have a mechanism by which to inform or impact the
Right.
decision from the ZBA.
yeah, I understand that, but I was just wondering what your thoughts were on whether or not.
No, I mean, more broadly, Jack, it's a philosophical discussion that goes to, legislating from the bench. And the first time that occurred was John Quincy Adams that was a Supreme Court justice after being president. I forget. That part of history is a little fuzzy back there, but legislating from the bench is always a concern that people have, depending on which way the legislation goes. So the ZBA is really no different. They are a judicial organization, and when someone applies for a variance, which is not, I should just print off copies of Article 7 and hand them out at meetings because it's actually fairly good reading. There's no judgment of whether a variance application is in any way the property owner suggesting that the law is somehow faulty. They are simply asking for an exception to be made for them on their property. And so anyone who applies for a variance is basically saying, please make me the exception. And the ZBA gets to decide yay or nay in each case.
But the ZBA also has the obligation not to go willy-nilly on whatever kind of variance they're granting. They do have to stay within some sort of framework of the zoning ordinance. If it's something that they disagree with the limits of, well, that's one thing, but, it's another to just kind of.
Article 7 actually does not state that. Article 7 does not state that. There are the willy-nilly and staying within the framework of the zoning. The categories are, going from memory, so don't quote me, but categories are that the There is an impact to the overall community piece. There is not a self-imposed hardship piece, but, and that's up to the ZBA to adjudicate. But it doesn't actually say that they have to follow precedent. It doesn't say there has to be some consideration of other pieces of the zoning law. It is what it is. It's an application by a property owner requesting that an exception be made specially for them, especially for their property, because everyone is very special. And that's, that is the heart and soul of what a variance application is, and the ZBA gets to, you say yes or no?
Right, but if the same situation comes up, and whether or not it's the same scale or not, whether basically if it's the same principle that is involved with their granting or denying a variance, there has to be some consistency in their decisions.
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. It is property specific and situation specific.
Yeah, but I mean, it's also situationally specific.
True.
And if that should come up, that it happens to be a very similar kind of thing, but it is definitely, case specific as to what is granted and what is precedent. I agree. Anyhow, it's getting late.
Getting there.
Thank you.
Any other public comment? Yeah, Ann.
I had one more thing I found in my emails. The Alcohol and Drug Council just got approval to open up a facility, a treatment and referral facility. And so basically what that is they're going to later open up a 40, hopefully if we get funding, a 40-bed detox center. And so this is going to be it's going to be open in probably a couple of weeks. And it's on Triphammer Road across from the McDonald's. Autodesk used to be in there. If you're familiar with the area. It's a two-story building. So hopefully, but right now it'll be, so for instance, anybody can go in there or call and they'll help you figure out a place to go for detox or for treatment or to get housing or whatever you're needing right then. And then eventually that will turn into 40-bed detox. If we just need $500,000. So.
All it takes is time and money.
Yeah. So that's pretty exciting, and that'll be for all of the surrounding counties also, not just this county, but there isn't anything close by, so it'll be really great when that's open.
Any other public comment? Yes, sir.
Tom Beck, Pennsylvania Avenue. First, I can't tell you how distraught I am from my sudden fall from valued community contributor, the troublemaker sitting next to Jay. I'm
Good by association.
almost speechless, but I'm part. Actually, the public hearing you're talking about for the two laws, I can hear at a time or a place.
March 7th,
Well, I got
Thursday night, right here. That's our March monthly meeting.
Oh,
is
that's your
Thursday.
meeting? Oh, okay.
There's a conflict with that next Monday.
Thursday, right?
What's that?
It's Monday.
Sorry.
That following Monday would be our regular meeting, but we had
All right.
some scheduling issues, so we moved it up.
So 7 p.m. here.
Yeah.
Okay. And I have some, my favorite topic of the village, local laws.
Yep.
But if the public hearings are a better place for that, then, I guess, I'm just curious as to the traffic and parking thing, didn't look like a change. And I'm just wondering why we're changing it.
Had
I
some,
mean, I know there's one specific thing the public want to change it, does that actually require a?
Yes.
Who
yes.
does that? The police department and you guys?
So we had some stop signs that we needed to move and those kinds of things. So it does, believe it or not, require the law to be changed.
Yeah.
And that's the only process to do it, so.
Oh, okay. And then one with the, I guess I have with the tax thing, I kind of hate, generally speaking, open-ended things. And last year, I think I got the impression that that's sort of open-ended, and I'm not suggesting that you guys would refuse that, but that's, I wonder if it could be considered to put some sort of a, whatever the regular percentage is, some sort of say, hey, if it goes over 3%, maybe we should meet and discuss this. And I'm not sure even what specific services we would be losing, but at some point it seems to me that the consumers, and you guys too, should have a say in, maybe that's not worth that price. You know, again, if you're talking about, we're not going to use water and fire anymore, we're just going to hold on or something like that. I'm not talking about that, but I guess I'm not suggesting you guys have or will abuse that, but it just seems a little dicey to me for stuff like that. But if something like a clause like that can be considered, it's just a benchmark to say, let's do and see what we're doing.
I remember your comment on that last year, Tom. There isn't a mechanism by which a board can limit itself from adopting a budget that it itself then has to pass. So all the tax cap override is saying is that the limit that Albany has seen fit to impose, we are authorizing ourselves to exceed it if necessary. I do encourage, and we had our first budget meeting last week, and there was no one from the public in attendance. I do encourage folks to come if they possibly can, watch the video if they can't, because we talked about it at the meeting. We as a municipality, and it's not unique to Trumansburg, are in a situation where our total taxable assessments over the last 10 years have gone up about 2% a year. Now, the way that happens is it's fairly flat, up a little bit each year, and then there'd be a big jump when there's a reassessment by Tompkins County, and everybody gets upset because their assessment went up $20,000 or $30,000. But spread out over time, it's roughly 2% a year. That has all been almost entirely through valuation increase. Your house, my house, everyone's house gets reassessed higher. None of it really is attributable to any property growth of any kind. So we look at that trend as being roughly 2% a year. And our levy has increased roughly 6% a year over that same period of time. 3 of that 6%, half of it, is raises to employees, 3% annual raise. And the other half is essentially the growth in services of EMS and fire. This year, police, because we took on some full-time employees. So we do have a decision to make at some point as we look at if we were a business with 2% revenue growth and 6% expense increase, we can see the end game. We don't have to be mathematicians to figure out that ends somewhere and it doesn't end well. So we do have a decision to make as a community, and I encourage people to attend. And the decision essentially is, do we want to allow that to continue, and means our property taxes go up? Or do we want to stop giving employees raises? Or do we want to start cutting services? And the services that are available to cut, because fire is state mandated, the services that are available to cut are ambulance and police, and DPW to a certain extent. But when you have streets, you have to plow them, and water and sewer are separate, so that's not part of the equation. So it's a tricky calculus, and I'm always open to input. Every once in a while, I'll hear someone say, "Well, we don't need a police department," and then I'll ask them, which of the 1,200 calls a year do you want not picked up? Ambulance is an interesting one because it is so expensive per call. But health-related emergency services seems like a tough one to cut.
I would imagine that other villages are experiencing the same issue.
They are.
Is there any thought or feeling about banding together and approaching the state, or is that just?
The state just cut our funding.
The state just said, we're cutting or they want to, they haven't passed the budget yet, but the desire is to cut out state aid to municipalities. Their goal is clear. Their goal is they want villages to dissolve. They want those services to be either managed by the town or the county.
From a village standpoint?
This is gonna get into a longer conversation, Tom. Right?
No, Mr. Pepe, it is not.
You're just the troublemaker sitting next door.
Fair enough.
Fair
enough.
That's not true. Thank you.
Villages have chosen to do it.
Yeah.
Some villages have chosen to do it. The reality is the service doesn't go away. You just spread the cost out over a different tax base. So then the question then becomes for the village, which operates, especially in the case of fire and EMS, operates a service that services a region more than just the village. And as we talked about at the State of the Village, you're talking about 110 square miles in the case of ambulance. Would the village want to dissolve and hand off the management of that service with no guarantee of future control or even existence of the service? It's a conversation to have. If the town were bigger, we're getting out into the weeds a little bit, but you asked. New York State classifies towns in two ways. There's towns of the first class and towns of the second class, which is based on population. Ulysses is considered a town of the second class. If it were a town of the first class, it's a first class town categorized as a town of the second class. If it were categorized as a town of the first class, it would be allowed to have wards. That could be interesting because then at least we could have wards so the village would retain representation on the town board. But that's not possible in a town of the second class. So, you would have 45% of the town's population living in a residential center with potentially no elected representation on the town board. That's another issue that would be problematic for me when it comes to dissolving the village. But yeah, it's part of the long-term conversation of how do we pay for stuff. Other villages who choose not to consolidate have addressed it through trying to encourage development. Lansing dropped a couple of malls in the middle of their village, and now some of the malls are empty and they're trying to figure out what to do with the space. We don't have room in the village, and I don't think anyone here wants a power plant. So barring some large-scale $100 million property valuation type project, these are things we'll have to try to figure out incrementally year over year. And when we add some staff, like we did the police, and ambulance department picks up more calls and more territory, it brings it to our consciousness because it's expensive.
I guess, coming back to various point, I heard a couple of different things, but it goes through the process, I get that part, and I understand, as you folks said, that this board then can decide, like, oh, that's not right, and you said something about Article 78, which kind of is some sort of thing. But does that vote, I think Ben, you had mentioned a unanimous vote, word. And in an example, you said if we came to a unanimous vote and decided this was not the right thing to do, we could start on Article 78. I was just wondering if that comes to that point, does it have to be a unanimous vote?
No, my point was that
You used an example.
Yeah, my point was that the only mechanism for this board to contest a ZBA or a planning board decision for that matter is the same mechanism as any individual can contest it, which is the lawsuit version.
But you guys would have to be regarded of that,
Right.
But you couldn't do it in, well, I guess you could do it individually citizen, I suppose, but as this board, representing the village, you have to do it. And do it.
Correct.
And
Theoretically.
one last point.
Yeah.
You want me to attend the budget meetings? The way to do it is never call me in trouble.
So I just want to add on that point. You asked Burton about dissolving the village, and you'll notice that he paused. This is the first year that our budget process has been so stressful that it gave him pause when he made that answer. That should indicate something to you that I hope doesn't scare you into coming to our budget meetings, because this year will be very hard. I hope everyone comes, everyone is watching. Please come.
I didn't know this man, I was actually lost in his eyes.
Oh, for God's sake.
There we go.
What you said to me, or?
There's the.
It's later than I
Was it lost?
No, you just.
Any additional public comment?
Can I just say that it would be good to have public hearings posted on the village website in a fashion that gives people time to schedule for it.
Yeah, we have our budget meetings, I think, are posted as a whole.
Everything is posted.
There's like a block post that are all of our budget meetings for the next couple months.
Our budget meetings, just to be clear, our budget meetings,
Traffic meeting and that's all we're hearing.
our budget meetings are not hearings.
No, but I mean.
The public hearing for traffic and
The cap.
the cap will be going up this week for
Okay.
March 7th.
That was actually part of the reason why we moved it, is we didn't get it announced early enough for everyone to know when
Okay.
that was gonna happen, so that's part of why that happened.
Yeah, no, it's good just to get it out there and have it available. So, but thank you.
Any other public comment?
There's cookies.
Cookies and pizza, please take some.
I'll just want to mention, when I was in Albany for the conference that I talked about, we spent an extra day in Albany and went and lobbied a lot of different staff for legislators, and so one of the things that we asked was to either lessen the mandates or give back money back to the municipalities, or to stop having the cap. And
0 for 3.
so it's,
Our catchphrase on this board has become, we're on our own. So,
yeah, that's what it's looking for, like it's just somebody want us to fend for ourselves.
yep. Any additional public comments? All right, if not, then I would entertain a motion to go into executive session to discuss EMS personnel, police personnel, and proposed pending future or possible someday litigation.
So,
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions.